Welcome back to Silicon Wafers. Today we dig into Vladimir Putin's latest Valdai address in Sochi, the ominous threats he's issuing towards Europe, and all that this says about a Kremlin that may be overreaching, doubling down in its delusion, preparing for more direct confrontation. We'll tie together his rhetoric with Medvedev's inflammatory commentary, the creeping hybrid assaults across NATO airspace, and the question, when might threatening words give way to kinetic actions? Before we dive in, thank you to everyone who supports the channel through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and of course, if you are supporting our efforts to source trucks for the 93rd Battalion of Holodny Yar, you'll see links in the description here. You'll also see the fantastic trailer for Kiev of Mine, an absolutely essential documentary for everyone who is committed to Ukraine's cause to watch. It is beautiful, uplifting, positive, and an essential piece of filmmaking. Now, let's jump in. Putin at Valdai, signaling and posture. The Valdai Discussion Club is the Kremlin's preferred stage for strategic and PR theatre, a hybrid of salon, power speech, foreign policy signaling, one of the few fixtures that has lasted near annually throughout Putin's reign. It's as much about internal as external signaling. The Valdai Forum has been described as a swanky, high-level conference put on by the Russian elite and often dubbed the Kremlin's answer to Davos. That's from Wikipedia. At the latest Valdai plenary in Sochi, Putin walked a balancing tightrope, a line denying any intent to attack NATO while condemning Europe for escalating militarization. That's from The Guardian. We are closely monitoring the escalating militarization of Europe, he said. We simply cannot ignore what is happening. We have no right to do so for reasons of our own security. The Guardian, of course, that is ironic because Europe is awaking from its slumber after the Cold War. It is militarizing precisely because of the threat from Vladimir Putin. I think no one doubts that Russia's countermeasures will not be long in coming, he threatened. That's again quoted in The Guardian. And all this sounds very similar to the noises that were being made about Ukraine prior to the full-scale invasion of 2022, about the apparent threat it posed to Russia and about the need to demilitarize it. Putin dismissed the notion that Moscow intends to attack NATO as nonsense. Again, straight denial of this carries the ominous suggestion that actually it might be on the table. They keep repeating this. They can't believe what they're saying, that Russia is going to attack NATO. They're either incredibly incompetent or they're simply dishonest. That is what Putin said. He also accused Europe of undermining peace via hysteria and attacking European elites for stymieing negotiations. Again, The Guardian. All this while Russia conducts the largest global conflict since World War II on the territory of Europe, and suspected Russian drones are now buzzing European airspace on a near daily basis and at some considerable scale. This is the extraordinary level of threat that Russia poses while playing the victim and accusing those that it is attacking of being themselves the attackers. On the Ukrainian war itself, Putin doubled down. Russian forces are confidently advancing, he claimed, despite many Western estimates to the contrary. He continued comparing Russian and Ukrainian losses in ways that are favourable to Moscow. That's analysis from The Guardian. The frightening thing is, he may actually believe these things, or at least anticipates that they will be true very soon. In parallel, Putin warned Europe of a significant response if it continues to support the Ukrainian militarily. That's from Le Monde. To frame this speech, Putin is signaling that he perceives Europe as a threat both politically and militarily, and is laying the rhetorical groundwork for further escalation. He's using the Valdai Forum not just for prestige, but for threat management, to test public reactions, calibrate messaging, seize escalation dominance, re-establish reflexive control over his perceived adversaries, and sow ambiguity about the thresholds of confrontation that he is willing to violate. The implicit threats and Medvedev's firebrand comments. Well, Putin's rhetoric is heavy with innuendo. Medvedev, however, former Russian president and prime minister, is his loudspeaker and provocateur, his yapping and rabid attack dog, and he often bridges the gap between Putin's innuendo and overt threats. This is more signaling that Putin will not back down, that he is on an escalatory trajectory, a political game of chicken, a geopolitical game of chicken, rather, that he is convinced his opponents will lose. Well, let's see how they amplify each other. Medvedev's drone talk and rhetoric around fear of escalation. Just days after Putin's Valdai address, Medvedev weighed in publicly on drone disruptions in Europe. In a Telegram post, he claimed pro-Russian sympathizers will not act independently without orders and warned Europeans. The main thing is that short-sighted Europeans feel the danger of war on their own skin, that they fear and tremble like dumb animals in a herd being driven to slaughter. An extraordinary statement. On the one hand, he's claiming that these provocateurs have nothing to do with Russia. On the other hand, he's implying that they are entirely following Russia's orders and entirely aligned with the Kremlin's geopolitical objectives. He did dismiss suggestions of Russian involvement, but framed the incidents as a useful reminder to Europeans of the danger of war. That is an implicit threat, and it also implies that Russia has control of these actors. In other words, he told Europeans they should crap themselves with fear over recent drone incursions. That's from the Times. Medvedev has also repeatedly cast the European Union as a primary enemy. In its current twisted form, the European Union is no less of a threat to us than the North Atlantic Alliance, he said. Well, clearly, he sees the European Union in the same way that maybe a thief might look at a burglar alarm. Again, how they would look at NATO as well. The European Union is a bastion of rule of law and is becoming increasingly a military barrier to Russia's ambitions, just as NATO fulfilled that role previously. And Medvedev has threatened nuclear escalation in a variety of public posts, admonishing that missiles could strike the Bundestag or the office of the German Chancellor. He also reminded US interlocutors of Russia's doomsday nuclear strike capability when challenged, while recourse to the nuclear threat is, of course, a familiar line from Medvedev. Before we move on to the next question, I'd like to make a personal recommendation that I know you will appreciate. You may have seen my interview last week with the producer of the film series Kiev of Mine, Ronnie Apteker. Well, I've partnered with them to help raise awareness of what I believe is an important series of films made for a Western audience to help break through absurd stereotypes about Ukraine, some of which, of course, are amplified by Russian propaganda. You can watch these films for free now. Details in a second. Kiev of Mine is a documentary series about Ukraine's extraordinary capital, which I had the privilege to visit for the first time in January this year. The film production began in 2018, and of course much has changed since then. It's now 2025, and the story is far from over. Kiev of Mine is a fast-paced, beautifully filmed, humorous, fun, insightful, heartbreaking, moving, and hopeful work. The very antithesis, in fact, of a doom-laden and worthy wartime documentary. This is a work that is extraordinarily uplifting. My friend, operator Starsky, says the film is made with so much love. The film series will make you laugh and cry. It's the only film about Ukraine that began before the war yet has traced lives through the tumultuous times, and which follows the lives of more than a dozen Ukrainians in real time. This is an historic period told through highly personal and emotive stories from Kiev's days of emerging prosperity after the Maidan Revolution through COVID and the full-scale invasion. This film is a breath of fresh air. Ukraine deserves a better conversation in the world, one that isn't centered around war, says Jolyon Ellis, filmmaker on Kiev of Mine. It's hard not to argue with that, and the filmmakers have fully delivered on this promise. This is essential watching for anyone who calls themselves pro-Ukrainian, but I think it's also vital to get friends, colleagues, and family to watch it too, because the reality is few people have a vivid impression of Ukraine or any direct connection with its people. War is inhumane and abstract, building an alternative perception is essential for engaging the world with the importance of Ukraine's struggle. Europe under threat. This is not a hypothetical scenario. Putin and Medvedev's threats are not idle posturing. Recent events back them up and confirm the escalatory arc that Putin seems locked into. Drone incursions into European airspace. In September 2025, around 19 to 23 drones entered Polish airspace, triggering the invocation of Article 4 of NATO. Analysts now flag drone swarms as a rising element in Russia's hybrid arsenal. That's according to the Atlantic Council. Countries like Denmark report drone activity near airports and military installations and warn that Russia may already be waging a full-scale hybrid war. That's in AP News. Thus, the verbal threats sit atop real escalations. Europe is seeing probes, incursions, ambiguity in attribution. Putin's phrasing and Medvedev's raw edge create a layered threat environment, plausible deniability or implausible, depending on how you look at it, cognitive pressure and escalation readiness. And they want us to know that they are behind it all. The deniability is implausible for the expert community, even though the media constantly labels it as ambiguous. And this is exactly what they mean it to be. They want to deter us from supporting Ukraine, to be divided and fearful, confused and distracted. Well, let's touch on overreach, delusion, and the logic of doubling down. So far, Putin's posture resembles a dictator cornered. Well, let's lay out the argument. Russia has overreached in its war in Ukraine. Now it's digging in harder because retreat is politically and psychologically intolerable. In fact, it would lead to the demise of Putin's regime and possibly his individual personal demise too. Well, what is the evidence of overreach? Well, Russia's war goals have mutated from rapid takeover to partial control to grinding attrition and survival. We covered this in yesterday's item on the channel, Why Putin Has Already Lost. The maximal ambitions have outstripped their capacity to deliver upon them. And then there are the losses, the logistical collapse, the manpower constraints, the command dysfunction, corruption, sanctions. All of this limits Moscow's ability to pivot and to project power and threat. But instead of scaling back, the regime is doubling down, intensifying the missile and drone attacks, invoking nuclear threats, expanding hybrid war. This is Putin's classic playbook. When you're cornered, you don't give in, you double down, you escalate further, you try to scare your enemy by appearing crazier and crazier. So why the doubling down? Well, there is no face-saving exit for the Kremlin, and Kremlin logic affords little room for retreat. Any pullback would be framed internally as defeat, disloyalty, betrayal, and we know that weakness is punished harshly in Russia. Khrushchev got away with just being removed from office. It's unlikely that Putin would get away with the same. There is, of course, as well, hope in the collapse of Western unity. Putin seems to believe or bet that internal divisions, war fatigue, elections, and ideological decay in the West will sooner or later unravel the collective support for Ukraine, and he has some evidence to believe that. Take, for instance, the recent election in the Czech Republic. Then there is the narrative belief. The regime may believe its own mythology, that it is a bulwark against decadence, that time is on Russia's side, that Western liberalism is too fragile to sustain. There is also the risk asymmetry. Russia views it has less to lose. It already lives under sanctions, some of the most punitive sanctions in the history of the world. It has consolidated its internal control. It has some strong trading alliances and wartime allies. China has Russia's back for now. Escalation is less psychologically costly internally and comes with lower risks. And then lastly, there is bluff as strategy. Hard threats force responses. They shape the norms. They test defenses. If Europe refuses to respond, the bluff becomes a partial victory. Putin is an opportunist, a bully and a gambler. His bets have become ever higher stakes ones and more reckless. That's not to say they won't deliver, though. They won't give him what he needs, and that is to force his adversaries to back down. Putin thus seems cornered into escalation. It has to be said, cornered by his own bad choices, and he is certainly not in a position that affords much flexibility. Let's dig a little further into this delusion of Western collapse. It is a dangerous calculus. Part of Putin's posture stems from an ideological delusion that liberal democracy is failing, fracturing, destined to collapse, and that Russia, China, and the authoritarian models are rising inexorably. He casts Western societies as decadent, extreme, unstable, immoral even. This belief seems to shape his strategy. But to address the title of this episode, Putin may be placing his delusion of strength and victory above any cares for the weakness and brittleness of the Russian state. He may be blinded by the idea that his enemies are almost on the point of capitulation and keep pushing. All the while, Russia collapses around his ears. Well, what are the signs? He's publicly urged the narrative that Western allies are disconnected, corrupt, dishonest. Their societies are hollow and fragile. He is almost certainly overestimating the extent to which that is true. Russia and China, in contrast, in his mind, represent order, sovereignty, strength, realism, and power. Again, maybe it's true in the case of China. It's not so true, I suspect, in the case of Russia. And Putin may well believe that time is still on his side, despite the fact that we're in the fourth year nearly of the war. That he may simply outlast the West's will, not necessarily win swiftly. That perhaps is less important to him now. Europe will be exhausted, he thinks, divided, undermined by internal contradictions, migration, energy crises, populist backlash, and he knows that he has had some success in stoking these various crises. Well, his worldview is not entirely naive. It does have some strategic logic, but it underestimates the resistance of allies, the institutional resilience that is vested in democracy, especially European and Ukrainian democracy, and of course the risk of a backlash in Europe against the far right and the forces that he is seeking to stoke. So let's turn to preparations for conflict. It's hybrid now, hybrid first, kinetic later. So what is Moscow's strategy? What are they doing to turn rhetoric into power? The evidence suggests a phase one hybrid assault with the option of a kinetic backup. What does that look like? What does that mean? So first of all, there's the hybrid toolkit. It's being built and is expanding. Drone swarms and aerial probes. Russia is mass producing drones, testing swarm tactics and probing European airspaces, their responses and infrastructure. That's according to the Atlantic Council. Then there is cyber and sabotage. Russian sabotage operations across Europe, pipelines, cables, rail, communications remain active, and Russia has undertaken a wide range of stress tests across Europe, across all these different areas of infrastructure and essential civilian resilience. There is, of course, as well, narrative operations and disinformation, the constant flood of denial, blame shifting, gaslighting, and alternate realities from outlets like RT, Sputnik, proxy channels, troll networks, social media networks, and useful assets and idiots in the West. Kinetic escalation is implied in Russia's strategy. Public warnings that Russia may respond kinetically if Europe escalates, that is his language, and as he frames it, Russia has prepared a significant response. This suggests the possibility of missile, air, ground operations well beyond Ukraine, according to Le Monde. This also fits into the pattern of Russian hard warfare historically. Create a provocation, play the victim, and all the while attack. The drone wall proposals by European states to defend their airspaces show that they anticipate some level of kinetic danger. That's according to Newsweek, but they may not be able to move fast enough to head it off. In fact, Putin's timing may be dictated by the need to strike before the drone wall is ready. Russia continues to modernize its missile, electronic warfare, and nuclear forces, and occasionally reopens the possibility of nuclear testing for reflexive control over its adversaries, if nothing else. That's in Reuters. So rhetoric, action, and what comes next. Let's synthesize some of the themes that we've covered in this episode. Putin's Valdai speech, Medvedev's firebrand commentary, the drone incursion sabotage, and narrative pressure all form a coherent escalation posture, a pattern of aggression. But is Europe ready? And will Putin keep pushing even while his own system buckles and crumbles? Will he escalate to the point of Russia's collapse? I think that he will. Rhetoric linked to real operations. Putin's claim of Europe hyper-militarizing and obstructing peace aligns with his narrative of grievance and mirror patterns of Russia rhetorical framing and provocations over decades. It is such a classic tool to accuse your enemy of that which you are yourself guilty of. Medvedev's verbal provocations often provide plausible deniability for Moscow while ratcheting threat levels. That might work in sections of the media, but in the analyst community, these kind of threats are looking implausibly deniable. As I said earlier, that is the point. It's threat signaling by a regime from a figure that is absurd and has little personal authority, that is Medvedev, but whom we know is close to Putin's inner circle. So what should we watch out for? Well, any move by Moscow to pre-position its forces near NATO borders, for instance, Kaliningrad, the Baltics, Belarus, Finland, further drone swarm attacks on European civilian infrastructure, airports, power grids, and we should watch out for a significant scaling up and increase in frequency of such attacks. We should be prepared for surprise kinetic strikes in buffer zones, on contested areas, and perhaps on critical infrastructure, that is civilian and military. Then there is the surge in cyber sabotage or the stealth wrecking of critical infrastructure. Again, that is likely to cover financial infrastructure, energy infrastructure, logistics, and possibly military as well. What we see now is a Kremlin doubling down on confrontation. Putin is not retreating quietly. He is testing, pushing, probing, escalating. Medvedev is his rhetorical shock trooper. Europe sits at an inflection point. We must respond robustly or risk being pushed into division and submission by Russia's terroristic salami slicing tactic, a creeping barrage of hybrid threats and blows. A final word from our partners, the makers of Kiev of Mine. All three films are now available to watch for free on YouTube. Please check out the links to the dedicated website, which tells you more about the film, its subjects, and the filmmakers. Also in the description is a link to the YouTube channel where you can watch the films now. Do let us know in the comments what you think of them and if they inspire you as much as they have inspired me.